2023. He bought a church for Waller and found a child's drawing that solved a cold case. They say old buildings hold on to memories. Some hum with the soft echoes of weddings, baptisms, and late-night confessions. Others refuse to speak at all. This one didn't whisper. It watched, quiet, waiting. The kind of silence that presses against your chest, not empty, but listening. Evan Brooks stood at the threshold of St. Emery's church, keys cold in his palm. The door was heavier than he expected, its wood swollen with years of rain and indifference. It moaned when he pushed, as if warning him. But Evan, curious to the core and a little reckless in the way only dreamers are, stepped inside anyway. Dust floated like old souls in the fractured sunlight. Pews sat crooked, some splintered, others barely clinging to structure. The pulpit leaned to the left, draped in cobwebs like mourning veils. But it wasn't the decay that unsettled him. It was the stillness. It felt less like abandonment and more like interruption, as if something once started here had never truly ended. Evan had driven past this church a dozen times over the past year, always drawn to its haunted dignity. So when the town offered it for sale at a ceremonial $1 to anyone willing to restore it, he showed up at the courthouse with his checkbook and no second thoughts. He wasn't particularly religious, but he loved history, architecture, and the idea that beauty, even faded, broken beauty, deserved a second chance. He spent the first few hours just walking, letting his footsteps echo off the walls, familiarizing himself with the creaks and groans of the floorboards. He imagined light installations where stained glass used to be, modern sculptures where the altar once stood. But when he entered the back hall, a narrow corridor lined with brittle announcement boards and rusted file cabinets, the air shifted. Denser, colder. A corkboard clung to the far wall, covered in faded flyers. Easter breakfasts, choir recitals, a 1989 youth retreat with smiling kids and a cross drawn in marker. Evan tugged gently at the top corner. The board didn't budge. He pried harder. The nails screeched as they came free, revealing the wall behind it. But something else was there too. A curled piece of paper wedged between the cork and plaster. He pulled it out. It was stiff with age, edges browned and cracking. On it was a child's drawing, done in crayon. A girl in a blue dress, standing beside what looked like a tangle of green and brown scribbles. Maybe a bush or a thicket. A cross loomed behind her, tilted. Above the drawing, in shaky block letters, "She's still there." Evan blinked. It was a child's art. Innocent. Except it wasn't. Not with that message. Not with that tone. He looked closer. The paper had been sealed to the back of the board with layers of dried glue. Someone had hidden it intentionally, not stored. Hidden, protected, or buried. He felt something stir in his stomach. Not fear, exactly. A gnawing curiosity laced with unease. He brought the drawing to the front of the church, placed it on the warped altar table, and sat down in a pew. His mind raced. Who drew this? Why hide it? Who is she? And why is she still there? He flipped the paper over. No name, no date. Just one faint fingerprint in the lower right corner, smudged into the crayon. That night, Evan barely slept. The drawing rested on his kitchen table, illuminated by the refrigerator light whenever he passed. He kept circling back to that message. She's still there. Not was, not might be, still. The next morning, he walked into the town's only cafe, a cozy spot called Dot's Diner. The bell above the door rang as he entered, catching the attention of two older women behind the counter. "You're the one who bought St. Emery's," one said, wiping her hands on a floral apron. "Brave soul." He smiled awkwardly. "Yeah, that's me, Evan. You planning to turn it into something? An art space, maybe, but I found something yesterday. A drawing. Thought someone here might recognize it." He pulled the paper from his coat pocket and laid it on the counter. The woman nearest him, white-haired, soft-eyed, stared. Her face drained of color, her hand lifted to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "That's Kylie's." "Kylie?" "Kylie Benson," the other woman said, voice hushed. "She disappeared in 1989, right after summer camp. Last seen outside that church." Evan looked between them. "She was 9, the woman said softly. Drew all the time. That green thing there, that's the bush behind the church. I remember her showing me that spot once. She said it was her secret hiding place. We never saw her again." The diner felt colder, smaller. "They never found her?" Evan asked. The women shook their heads. "No body, no clues, just her shoes near the creek. Police called it an accident eventually, but they didn't finish." He walked back to the church, slower than usual. The sky was pale, windless, but every leaf on every tree seemed to twitch, as if they, too, remembered something. Inside, he traced the path from the drawing. The bush, the angle of the cross. He stepped behind the building, toward a corner he hadn't examined closely. There it was, a patch of overgrown brush, almost exactly like the one in the crayon image. The church's back wall loomed nearby. He knelt, reached into the tangled mess. His hand brushed something soft, a scrap of fabric, blue, buried beneath the dirt and leaves. And then he saw it. A piece of brick, loosened. Evan stood up slowly. If the drawing was real, if it meant something, he wasn't just renovating a church. He was reopening a grave. The next morning, Evan woke with the kind of heaviness that settles behind the eyes, not from exhaustion, but from knowing the world has tilted slightly, and nothing is quite where it was. The drawing lay beside his coffee mug, the crayon still vibrant after all these years. "She's still there?" The words haunted him more now, like a dare whispered from beneath the floorboards. He stood on the back lawn of the church by 8 a.m., shovel in hand, not entirely sure what he was doing, only that he couldn't do nothing. The ground was stubborn. Roots tangled like veins beneath the soil. He dug slowly, respectfully, as if the earth held memory, and he didn't want to bruise it. The sun rose higher, sweat gathered beneath his collar, and still he dug, stopping every few inches to pull away leaves or search for anything that didn't belong. By noon, he found it. A second scrap of cloth, pale blue, softer than the first, pressed flat by time. Evan sat back on his heels, staring at it. A breeze moved through the brush, and for a second, he imagined a child's laugh carried on the wind. Then silence returned. He didn't call the police right away. He didn't want to be the man who cried skeleton over a piece of cloth. Instead, he walked to the public library, where decades of yellowed newspapers waited like forgotten whispers. The reference librarian, a thin man with a voice like parchment, helped him access the microfilm. Kylie Benson, June 1989, missing. Last seen at St. Emery's summer day camp. A police statement said she was playing hide and seek and never returned after lunch. Her shoes were found near the creek, but no footprints, no drag marks, nothing else. No sign of struggle, no witnesses, just gone. Evan read every article, even the ones that speculated she ran away, though she was only 9. One column quoted her teacher, who said Kylie was bright but often anxious. Drew pictures that made adults pause, forests with eyes, smiling girls surrounded by shadows. One teacher thought it was imagination. Another thought it was a cry. His chest tightened. He returned to the church as the sun dipped below the treetops. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in the front pew, staring at the altar, the stained wood, the cracked crucifix. At 2 a.m., he whispered aloud, not sure to whom, "If you're still here, I see you. I'm listening." Something creaked above him. The next morning, the sheriff's cruiser rolled up the gravel path. Evan had called just after dawn, voice shaking but steady. He told them everything: the drawing, the cloth, the history. To his surprise, the sheriff listened, didn't scoff, just nodded and called in a forensic team. They cordoned off the area. Cameras flashed. Flags marked patches of earth. Within hours, the mood shifted. Voices lowered. Faces paled. One of the techs pulled Evan aside. "We found small bones, not enough for a full body, but human, likely a child." The air felt too thin. The sheriff turned to him. "We'll have to run tests, but if this matches the Benson case, it's going to open a whole new investigation." Evan nodded slowly. "She didn't run away." "No," the sheriff said, jaw tight. "She was placed here." Word spread faster than wildfire. Reporters showed up by evening. Old neighbors returned, their faces wrinkled with years and disbelief. Some cried, some prayed. One woman left a tiny stuffed rabbit on the church steps. Evan watched it all from the front door, the drawing now sealed in a plastic sleeve and handed over to detectives. The town began to remember. A woman approached him late in the day, her voice soft, eyes glassy. "I was at that camp. I was 13. I remember Kylie, sweet kid. But there was this counselor." She trailed off. "What about him?" Evan asked. "He was always off, too quiet, watched us too much. Kylie once told me she didn't like the way he stood behind her, said he gave her the crawlies. I told someone, I think. Or maybe I just meant to. I don't know anymore." She handed him a name. Evan passed it to the sheriff. The background check didn't take long. The man had moved states 3 times, never married, never stayed long in one place. No priors, but plenty of smoke. The sheriff looked at Evan. This might be the tip of something. Evan felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. He hadn't asked for this. He just wanted to fix a building. Instead, he had cracked open a town's collective forgetting. That night, he dreamed of the drawing. Except this time, the crayon girl turned and looked at him. Her mouth didn't move, but he heard her voice anyway. Don't stop now. He woke up gasping, the dawn light cold and sharp through his bedroom window. The town had more secrets. He could feel them waking up, one by one. It didn't take long before the silence of the church stopped feeling sacred and started feeling haunted. By the third day of renovations, Aaron stopped listening to music while he worked. The echoes of his own footsteps seemed more trustworthy than anything coming through a pair of wireless earbuds. That morning, the sky outside was iron gray, heavy with the threat of rain, as if the heavens themselves were bracing for something. Aaron was perched on a shaky wooden stool beneath the northern stained glass window, where a corkboard was nailed to the wall, faded church flyers still clinging to it with yellowed tape. He intended to remove the board, repaint the wall behind it, and maybe hang a framed hymn from the church's better days. Something hopeful, something light. But as he pulled at the brittle corner of the board, the material resisted. It was heavier than expected. When it finally gave way, the whole piece came loose in his hands with a soft, reluctant sigh, like it didn't want to be found. Behind it wasn't the smooth plaster he expected. It was something else entirely. There, glued flat against the wall, like a secret, was a child's drawing. The paper was stiff with age, discolored at the edges, and strangely intact. The colors had dulled, but not disappeared. A little girl had drawn this, clearly. A crude blue crayon sky, a house with a pointed roof, stick figures with smiling faces. And then, just off to the side, beneath what looked like trees, a red shape that didn't belong. Misshapen, dark, crossed over again and again like the child had tried to bury it, but couldn't. Aaron felt his skin prickle. He took a picture before touching anything. His hands hesitated over the drawing. It was glued fast to the wall, almost like it had been sealed. He could see flecks of dried adhesive along the corners, haphazard, rushed. Not the kind of thing you do to preserve art. He peeled slowly, carefully, until the page came free. There was writing on the back, not a name, not a date. Just 6 small, uneven words in childish handwriting. She said, "Don't tell," so I didn't. That was it. Aaron stood frozen, the paper trembling between his fingers. The room, once filled with soft light, now felt dimmer somehow, heavier. He didn't know why, but he folded the paper as gently as if it were alive and placed it on the altar where he could see it while he thought. He didn't call anyone, not yet. Part of him felt absurd. This was probably nothing, right? Just a drawing, maybe from a church art class, glued and forgotten. Maybe the red shape was a balloon or a fire. Kids drew weird things all the time, but the feeling in his gut wouldn't let it go. He stared at the note again. She said, "Don't tell," so I didn't. The use of past tense made his stomach twist. He went back to the wall, inspecting the space behind where the corkboard had been. That section of plaster felt different, hollow. He rapped on it softly with his knuckles. It echoed. He traced his fingers along the wood molding until he found a seam he hadn't noticed before. A line in the wall, barely visible. Aaron's heart beat faster. Was there something behind it? He didn't have a crowbar, but a rusted screwdriver would have to do. As he wedged it into the seam and pried gently, the panel gave way with a groan, releasing the thick, musty breath of decades-old air. Behind it, a small crawlspace, just 3 feet deep, lined with old insulation and forgotten junk, dusty hymnals, candle boxes, a broken fan. Nothing terrible, until he saw the shoe. A child's shoe, brown leather, size too small for any adult. It was sitting alone on a folded blanket. The fabric around it stained a strange, reddish color that didn't look like rust. He backed away, heart pounding. It was time to call someone. The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later, lights off, unmarked vehicle. They didn't want to cause a scene. Aaron led him silently to the wall, handed over the drawing, pointed to the crawl space. The sheriff, a man in his 60s named Harrington, didn't speak much. He examined everything quietly, called in a second officer and a forensic team. Soon, the church felt like a different place entirely. No longer his project, but a crime scene. Yellow tape went up. Questions followed. And all the while, the child's drawing sat on the altar, watching. That night, Aaron couldn't sleep. He lay on the couch in his small apartment above the town library, eyes open in the dark, replaying the drawing over and over. The red shape, the trees, the words. She said, "Don't tell," so I didn't. The next day, Harrington called him in. They had matched the shoe to a missing persons report from 1989. A 6-year-old girl named Callie Monroe who disappeared after Sunday school. Her body was never found. Her case had gone cold in 1991. Until now. The drawing was signed on the front, in the lower right corner, just barely legible beneath the blue sky, Maddie. Aaron's mind whirled. Was Maddie another child from the church? Someone who'd seen something but didn't understand? Was she still alive? Or was she the one who drew the map, and then vanished too? The sheriff said they were reopening the case. They would search the crawl space more thoroughly, check records, talk to old church staff. But Aaron wasn't done. He needed to know why that drawing had been hidden. Who sealed it there? Who told Maddie not to tell? So he went back to the church. He stood beneath the stained glass window, now shadowed by police lights. He stared at the blank spot on the wall where the drawing had been. Then he noticed something new, scratched into the wood behind the molding, just below where the drawing had been glued. A name, Reverend L. Mathis. He didn't remember seeing that before. It was faint, shallow, like someone carved it quickly, quietly. Aaron took a picture, sent it to Harrington. The sheriff's response came hours later, short and cold. Mathis died in 19... Stroke. No criminal record. No complaints filed. But we'll check again. Aaron stood alone in the center aisle of the church, now gutted and silent, and realized something awful. Even if they found who did it, even if they uncovered the whole story, it wouldn't erase the fact that the truth had been hidden in plain sight for 34 years. And a child had tried to speak, but no one had listened, until now. The next morning brought fog so thick it rolled over the rooftops like ghost breath, blurring street signs and swallowing the church into a soft, white nothingness. Aaron stood at the bottom of the hill, looking up at the silhouette of the old chapel, its steeple barely piercing through the cloud. He hadn't slept again. The child's drawing and the carved name had rooted themselves somewhere behind his eyes, playing on repeat. Inside, the crime scene tape still fluttered faintly in the draft near the door. And though the space had been deemed temporarily off limits, Aaron had been granted access under the condition that he not touch anything else. He didn't care. He didn't come to move objects. He came to listen. He sat on one of the old pews, the wood creaking under him like it remembered being full once, of voices, hymns, laughter, secrets. He closed his eyes. Imagined the year 1989, the feel of summer light through the stained glass windows, small feet running across the floor, teachers setting up for Sunday school, the smell of cookies and coffee and old carpet, and somewhere, two little girls, Callie Monroe, the missing child, Maddie, whoever she was, the one who saw something, drew something, hid something. He imagined her with crayon-stained hands, trying to speak the only way she knew how. Pictures, lines, a red mark that might have meant everything. Aaron opened his eyes and looked again at the wall where the drawing had been glued. It still bore the faint discoloration of dried adhesive, like a scar on pale skin. Above it, the spot where Reverend L. Mathis had carved his name. Why would a reverend scratch his own name into the wood behind a board? Unless he'd wanted someone to know, but only if they dug. He pulled out his phone and searched for whatever he could find on Reverend Leonard Mathis. The man had led the church from 1977 to 1990. Died of a stroke at age 63. No surviving family. No public allegations. But Aaron found something odd. A scanned bulletin from a 1989 church newsletter. A note from the Reverend thanking the Sunday helpers, Sister Lorraine, Miss Deborah, and little Maddie W., for their joyful hearts and guiding hands. Maddie W. She'd been a child assistant, a helper. She wasn't just a kid who went to Sunday school. She was part of it. Trusted, known. Aaron's heart pounded. He took a screenshot of the newsletter and sent it to Harrington. The sheriff didn't reply right away. Hours passed. By late afternoon, the fog had cleared, but the weight in Aaron's chest only grew heavier. At sunset, Harrington finally called. "We found a full name," he said. Madeline Winslow. Parents moved out of state in 1992. No follow-up interviews ever conducted. Her file says she relocated to Seattle in 2006. Aaron stared at the floor. "Is she still alive?" "We're working on that." Silence. Then Harrington added, almost reluctantly, "We also pulled Reverend Mathis' private journals. Most are theological ramblings, but one entry stood out." Aaron held his breath. "It's from July 1989, the day after Callie Monroe disappeared. It says, 'The child drew again. I warned her, but she fears not the weight of silence. God forgive me for what I have hidden in your house.'" Aaron sat down hard. The Reverend had known. He hadn't acted. Or maybe he had, but in the wrong way. Maybe he thought hiding the evidence was protecting the church, or penance, or who knows. But a 6-year-old vanished. A drawing was sealed. And 34 years later, Aaron had inherited all of it. That night, Aaron didn't go home. He stayed in the church, curled beneath an old fleece blanket in the back office, staring at the ceiling. The wind outside howled like it was trying to speak. He dreamed of a little girl with dark curls, holding a red crayon that never ran out. She stood by the altar, drawing over and over again, each line darker, more frantic, until it bled through the paper. Aaron woke up shaking. The next day, the sheriff confirmed it. They had found Maddie. She was living in Portland now. A nurse. No criminal record. No history of mental illness. Just quiet, disconnected. They asked her to speak with them. She refused. But when they mentioned the drawing, the church, the red shape, there was a pause on the line. Then a whisper. "You found it." That's when everything shifted. Aaron wasn't just a renovator anymore. He wasn't even just a witness. He was part of the chain now. One link among many in a story that refused to stay buried. Maddie agreed to meet. She didn't want police lights, tape, or cameras. Just one quiet conversation in the church she hadn't seen since she was 7 years old. Aaron promised to be there, alone. And as he hung up the phone, hands trembling, he realized something that sent chills down his spine. This church hadn't been sold to him by accident. It had waited for someone who would listen, not just renovate. And now the past was knocking again, not with fury, but with a child's whisper and a red crayon still fresh in memory. The day Maddie came back, the air shifted. It wasn't anything dramatic. A stillness, maybe. A quiet too perfect for noon. The kind that hums beneath the bones and tells you something long held back is making its way forward. Aaron waited at the top of the church steps. The doors were unlocked. The lights were off. The pews had been dusted, but not rearranged. He hadn't changed a thing. Maddie pulled up in a rented gray sedan. She sat behind the wheel for a full minute before she opened the door. She was taller than he expected, her dark hair pulled into a low twist, her clothes plain, a scarf wrapped tight around her throat like armor. But it was her eyes that stayed with him, sharp, blue-gray, and heavy with memory. She didn't smile when she saw him. She just nodded. They walked in together, no words, just steps on hollow wood. When they reached the sanctuary, she stopped near the wall where the drawing had once hung. She didn't ask where it had been found. She didn't need to. "I remember that corner," she said softly, eyes scanning the faded paint. "We had to sit there if we got too rowdy during Sunday songs. It was like time out with Jesus." Aaron didn't laugh. Neither did she. Maddie's voice trembled as she said, "I was 5, almost 6. I drew it after the 4th of July picnic." Aaron waited. She was wearing red that day. Cali. Not bright red, more like rust. The kind of red that looks brown in the dark. I remember thinking she looked like a flower that forgot how to bloom. Her voice faltered, then picked up again, more brittle now. She followed him, the man in the blue suit. He said she'd left her doll near the pulpit. I remember thinking he was too pale, like bread before it's baked. He always smelled like paper and old coins. Aaron's chest clenched. "I told her not to go," Maddie whispered, "but she didn't listen. She wanted to be helpful. And then I didn't see her again." She took a breath that barely made it past her ribs. "I tried to tell. I did. I told Sister Lorraine. I told Reverend Mathis. But they told me not to make up stories. Said the church had enough grief with Callie gone. Said God sees all and punishes liars." Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. "I kept drawing. It was all I had. They took away my markers. I used crayons, then pencils, then chalk. I even carved with my fingernails once. I just Needed someone to see. Aaron swallowed. And the picture? I glued it myself. Stole glue from the Sunday cabinet. I figured if I hid it behind something boring, no one would ever find it, unless they were really looking. She paused. Guess you were? Aaron said nothing. She turned, slowly facing the altar. I used to sit right there, during evening choir. I hated the shadows. They danced. I always thought, maybe Callie was still here, just small enough now to live in the floorboards. Silence settled like a second skin. Then Maddie turned back to him. Did they find her? Aaron nodded once. The crawl space, behind the baptism pool. She closed her eyes. I drew that pool with a red circle. Not because it was blood, because it was her favorite color. I didn't want people to forget that. They sat together on the floor of the sanctuary, the dust warming beneath the sun's glow through the stained glass window. Time felt warped, like the church was stretching itself across decades to hold them both. You think he's still alive? Maddie asked. Aaron hesitated. Maybe. She looked at the wall again. I don't care if he is. I just wanted the silence to stop. And somehow, in that moment, it did. The creaks of the building weren't threatening anymore. The cold corners didn't carry dread. The space felt for the first time like it had exhaled. She stood. I can't stay, she said. But thank you for finding what I buried, for believing it mattered. Aaron didn't stop her. He just walked her to the door, held it open, and watched as she stepped into the afternoon light. She didn't turn back. He stayed there for a while, fingers brushing the doorway, forehead resting against the old wood. That night, he brought a chair to the middle of the sanctuary, sat with the silence, let it speak. He didn't light candles. He didn't pray. But for the first time, he didn't feel like a stranger. He felt like a witness. And behind him, nailed high on the wall, was something new. The drawing, preserved behind glass, still wrinkled, still childlike, but no longer forgotten. In the bottom corner, he'd added a tiny brass plaque. Her name was Callie. She was 6. She mattered. But just as the past seemed to settle, Aaron's phone buzzed. Unknown number. One voicemail. He pressed play. A man's voice. Low, dry, almost breathless. You bought the church. I saw the news. I know what you found, but you're not done. Then silence. Click. And Aaron, alone in the chapel, turned toward the soundless corners once more, feeling the shadows shift again. The voicemail didn't have a return number, just a timestamp. 2:37 a.m., and a silence so thick it seemed to pulse between each word. You're not done. Aaron replayed it 3 times, sitting alone in the chapel's front pew. The light from the stained glass window had gone cold. Outside, the wind picked up, dry leaves scraping along the cracked sidewalk like restless fingers. The church no longer felt haunted by the past. Now, it felt watched. He tried to dismiss it. Could have been a prank. Someone saw the news. Someone with too much time and too many ideas. But the voice? There was no performance in it, no malice either. Just wait, like the voice had been waiting decades to be spoken. He barely slept that night. The next morning, Aaron went to the crawl space behind the baptismal. He stared at the spot where Callie had been buried for all those years. The concrete had been patched over. The police had removed everything. But something still tugged at him, low and insistent, like an unfinished chord in a half-remembered hymn. He opened the old janitor's closet, one he hadn't fully explored. It was narrow, the air stale with ammonia and wood rot. He pushed past rusted mops and dust-choked brooms. At the back, buried behind a cracked bulletin board, he found a hatch, not hidden, but not meant to be seen either. It groaned when opened, revealing a second crawl space, smaller and deeper. He crouched, flashlight in hand, heart pounding like it wanted to leave his chest. It smelled like mold and time. Inside, there was nothing at first, just dirt, cobwebs, the distant scuttle of something living and small. Then the light caught on a wooden box, shoebox sized, sealed with brittle tape and dried wax. He pulled it out slowly, careful not to jostle the contents. When he opened it, the smell hit him first. Old paper, mildew, the faintest trace of something metallic. Inside were photographs, children, group photos, Sunday school smiles, each one dated, handwritten on the back in the same faint blue ink. At first, it looked innocent, until he realized there were marks, small X's, scratched onto the backs of certain children's heads. He counted them. 5. His stomach turned. Underneath the photos, folded into tight quarters, was a letter, typewritten, faint and yellowed. It read like a confession, but without a name, just a litany of memories. I watched them go, one by one. I never screamed. The world screamed for me. Then, a final line. I wasn't the only one. He said he had help. He called it the circle. Aaron sat on the floor, the box between his knees. The circle. He went to the local library archives the next day, pulled up old church directories, bulletins, funeral notices, obituaries. He made notes, cross-referenced names. When he returned to the photos, the truth became unavoidable. 4 of the 5 children with X's had disappeared. Each one ruled a runaway. No foul play found, but always from the same neighborhood, always connected to the same 3 churches. And then he saw it, an old newspaper clipping from 1990. A pastor named Vernon Hale retired suddenly due to health concerns. No further details. No obituaries. Just gone. Hale had served at St. Lucy's, then moved to St. Francis, before the church Aaron now owned. Aaron stared at the name, St. Francis, the same church where Maddie drew her picture, the same church where Callie died. And the 5th child in the photo? Not marked as missing. No obituary. No record at all. Until he remembered something Maddie had said, barely above a whisper. She wanted to be helpful. He looked back at the photo. The 5th child had her face turned slightly away. But the hair, the shape of the jaw, it was her. Maddie. Aaron's throat tightened. She hadn't just witnessed something, she'd survived it. He found her number and called. No answer. Left a message, then another. He debated going to her directly, but something held him back. Fear, maybe. Not of her, but of what she might remember if he pushed. That night, another voicemail came. Same voice. You found the box. I figured you might. There's more. But you already know that, don't you? Then silence. Aaron couldn't sleep. He sat in the sanctuary with the box. The pictures spread around him like evidence from a crime too old to charge. In the quiet, he spoke aloud. "What do you want me to do?" The shadows didn't answer, but the door at the back creaked open. Maddie stepped inside. She didn't speak at first, just stared at the photos. "I knew they weren't alone," she said. "There was someone else, watching, waiting. I used to dream about him, smiling without teeth." She sat beside him. "I'm ready now," she said. "You've carried the silence. I'll carry the story." Aaron looked at her. "Do you remember his name?" Maddie paused, then nodded. "I do. But we can't say it yet. Not until we're ready." Aaron felt the truth pressed down on them, like the weight of generations demanding to be named. Together, they turned back to the box, and as dawn stretched across the stained glass, coloring the world in bruised light and broken gold, Aaron knew this story wasn't over. It was just beginning.